2021 St. Paul Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is being held remotely as it's not practical nor prudent for the Planning Commission and its committees to meet in person or pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.02. In light of the ongoing pandemic, the Planning Commission will not be present at its regular locations, and members of the Planning Commission will be attending this meeting by telephone or other electronic means. We will begin today's meeting by taking a roll call. Sonia, can we get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Grill?
Commissioner Grill, present.
Commissioner Holst?
Here.
Commissioner Hood?
Here.
Commissioner Kantner?
Here.
Commissioner McMurtry?
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell? Commissioner Moore? Commissioner Presley? I don't think so. Commissioner Riley?
Here.
Commissioner Risberg?
Here.
Commissioner Tagia?
Yeah.
Commissioner Thomas? Commissioner Yang?
Here.
And of course, Chair Rangel Morales.
Here.
That's it.
Okay. So we'll begin today's meeting. I don't have any new announcements. So I'll turn it over to Director Pereira.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners and staff and members of the public. Just a couple things to note. The city staff team working on the 1 to 4 unit study, housing study rather, 1 to 4 unit housing study. I will say that again. Delivered a webinar on the 28th. We had it was the focus was on the phase 1 amendments that are up for public hearing on October 15th. We had a somewhat light turnout, about 15 people, but did record it and we'll be putting it onto the website. We're also talking with district councils and community organizations about next step engagement activities on the broader study that continues this year into next. And second, on Wednesday, October 6th, the City Council will have public hearings on a couple items that you've already seen and acted upon or recommended. The homeless services zoning text amendments, as well as the Ford open space lot coverage zoning text amendments and related master plan amendments. So just thought I would mention that for your awareness. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks, Luis. Any questions for our director? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is a zoning committee. So I'll turn to Commissioner Riley.
Thank you, Chair. The zoning let's see, the report for today, the October 1st Planning Commission meeting, is that there are 2 agenda items for the upcoming site plan review meeting scheduled for, let's see, it must be Tuesday, October 5th, which is Park at Westgate, which is 717 Berry Street, which is an application for site plan review from the City of St. Paul Parks and Recreation Department, and then a site plan revision for an industrial user at 2103 Wabash Avenue. There are 2 zoning items on the zoning committee agenda for next Thursday, October 7th. One is at 1179 7th Street East, which is the northeast corner of 7th Street at Duluth. It's a conditional use permit to convert the entire first floor of a commercial building to a residential use. Excuse me. And then 406 Maryland Avenue East, which is the southeast corner of Maryland Avenue and Arkwright, which is a conditional use permit for an auto convenience market and auto service station. Our meeting on Thursday, September 23rd, had one item on the agenda, which was a conversion, duplex triplex conversion item. Which, sorry, it's been a morning. Apologies. Establishment of a non-conforming use of a duplex triplex. So this was item at 1124, 1126 Lincoln Avenue between Dunlop Street and Lexington Parkway. The applicant was applying to establish a non-conforming use as a triplex and provided evidence that there was a long-term use of the property as a triplex. And the staff recommendation based on the duplex and triplex guidelines, which are currently under review, the staff was required to recommend denial of the establishment of a non-conforming use as a triplex for the property. But the recommendation from the zoning committee was to permit the establishment of a non-conforming use as a triplex as all of the required conditions were met. And I believe that was a unanimous decision. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Riley. So I'm sorry, could you say what the vote was on that?
It was unanimous in favor of approval of the condition of the establishment of a non-conforming use for a triplex.
So that's the motion coming out of committee. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, Sonia, could we?
Commissioner Yang has his hand up.
Oh, Commissioner Yang.
Yes, my question is, since the staff and the zoning committee have different opinion, I'm wondering what are the differences?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I believe the staff recommendation and the zoning committee recommendation are different. So I try to understand what the differences are.
Commissioner Riley.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question, Commissioner. The differences are that the staff recommendation, the staff had to recommend denial based on the establishment of the duplex and triplex conversion guidelines. However, those are not required findings. They are just sort of advisory findings that have been in place for quite a number of years, and they're currently under review by the planning staff. And so the required findings for establishment of a non-conforming use, all of those findings were met. And so in this scenario, it was up to the zoning committee to make a determination. And that's the major difference. We went by the required findings, all of which were met and therefore recommended approval. Staff, however, was required to recommend denial based on those existing guidelines. I hope that answers your question. If not, I can try and answer additional questions. Otherwise, staff is here as well. Thank you.
Commissioner Hood.
Thank you, Chair. I'll put my hand down. Thank you. Commissioner Riley made a comment that I was going to, so thank you.
Commissioner Yang, did that answer your question?
Well, I would like to elaborate a little bit more why the staff committee need to make that recommendation for denial, and the zoning committee has to deny the denial for whatever the evidence they found appropriate. So should we amend those established criteria for the staff, or we need to go case by case in the future?
Mr. Torstenson?
Commissioners Alan Torstenson, staff. I'll answer the first question that Commissioner Yang asked about what's the difference. In the resolution that's before you, in finding 2A, which is at the top of the second page, finding 2 lists the triplex conversion guidelines and the findings that must be met in order for the staff to recommend approval, and the guidelines state that if all of those findings can't be met, staff shall recommend denial. And in there's one finding that wasn't met, and that is in finding 2A. The guidelines call for a lot width of at least 50 feet, and the lot width in this case is 40 feet. And so all of the other guidelines were met. But based on that one, the staff recommendation is denial. And as Commissioner Riley pointed out, that the guidelines direct staff to recommend denial if they're not met, but it's a direction to staff, not a direction to the zoning committee or the planning commission. And in this case, the zoning committee looked at all the facts in the case and recommended approval based on the findings in the zoning code that are listed under finding 3 in the draft resolution. And based on I think Commissioner Riley also pointed out that the duplex triplex conversion guidelines may be amended. The commission is considering amendments or even elimination of the duplex triplex conversion guidelines. Question is whether they're needed any longer or continue to be consistent with the comp plan.
Director Pineda?
Yes, Chair, and Alan, thanks for starting that answer. The guidelines are among the amendments in phase 1 of the 1 to 4 study, and staff has recommended we essentially we eliminate them, and so that even though they're not actually zoning text amendments, they're guidelines the commission has followed or used for probably, has it been about 20 years? They've been amended over time, and so that is part of the public hearing. We'll get comments on it, or nobody will comment on it, and then the commission can decide to follow the staff recommendation to eliminate them or to amend them somehow. So that's coming up very shortly.
Thank you, Luis. And so I'll turn back to Commissioner Yang for any additional questions. Commissioner Yang?
I appreciate the context, and I think the difference is between 50 feet and 40 feet. Am I right with the understanding?
I'll turn either to staff or to Commissioner Riley.
Alan Torstenson here. Yes, that's correct.
So it's basically based on the size of the lot, right?
Right.
So from my understanding, 50 feet down to 40 feet, roughly 20% reduction of the area. So if you permit this unit to become a triplex, actually you increase the 6-fold of the occupancy, right, per resident, right? Am I right?
Yeah, so Chair Rangel Morales, members of the commission, in this case the house is there already. There is a unit in the basement that was added some time ago, and so there's no change in what is there proposed. It's just making that third unit legal. And the guidelines that we have zoning standards that currently have zoning standards that require a certain lot size per unit. And in this case, the guidelines state that, if we want, usually a 40-foot lot is a single family lot, a standard single family lot. And the guidelines state that for a house to be converted to a triplex, it should be at least 50 feet wide. That's a guideline.
Commissioner Riley?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Torstensen, for the clarity. I just wanted to note that it's also an and statement regarding the lot size. So it's at least 6,000 square feet with a lot width or foot frontage of 50 feet, and the lot side actually meets that 6,000, exceeds that 6,000 square foot minimum. And because it is a standard St. Paul city lot at 40 feet wide, that's really the and statement. So it's only one half of that statement that's not really met, which might highlight for folks why these guidelines are being studied again as well. I hope that's a helpful addition. Thank you.
I'll turn it back again to Commissioner Yang.
Well, thank you very much. I understand the current, the policy trend is to relax the restricted or previously set up the criteria, but I believe a balance should be drawn either from allowing too crowd or allowing, enough space for affordable housing concerns. I personally have no view about the site. I don't have the previous knowledge, but since those residents have been already there, I believe that's the current status, right? That's why they require for legalizing of their current situation. Am I right?
Commissioner Riley or Mr. Torstensen?
Yes, that's my understanding. The building has been operating as a triplex for quite some time, and the people are indeed already there.
So for this current situation, I believe the people who are living there already, they understand they have violated the city code already, right? The zoning code already, right? So should we give them a warning or a kind of penalty for ignoring the code, zoning code, or we just let it go?
So that, Commissioner Yang, is handled by the Department of Safety and Inspections on any enforcement action. I believe the matter before us today is just whether or not we establish a non-conforming use of a triplex. Anything else is pretty much outside of our scope.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any additional question though about the requirements, the staff recommendation, and then zoning committee's recommendation?
Chair, this is Commissioner Riley. I might actually answer Commissioner Yang's question about the penalty.
Go ahead.
If the application before us is in effect the penalty. They were discovered that it was discovered by DSI during a regular inspection that it was not a legally conforming triplex, and so in effect the fact that they are before us today is sort of the penalty. So this they understand that they were not, so that's sort of where we are. I hope that's helpful context, and I hope I'm correct. Mr. Torstenson, I'm sure can.
That is correct.
Okay. So seeing no additional questions, or Commissioner Yang, if you do have one, please go ahead and voice it now. Otherwise, the motion is to approve the non-conforming use as a triplex at 1126 Lincoln. We will go ahead and take a roll call on that. Sonia?
Okay, Commissioner Grill,
Yes.
oh, thank you. Commissioner Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner Holst,
Yes.
Commissioner Kantner,
Yes.
Commissioner McMurtry,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Risberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Tagia,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Yang.
No.
9-1.
So that motion does pass for establishment of a non-conforming use of the triplex at 1126 Lincoln. Commissioner Riley, is there anything else?
There is not. Thank you very much.
Okay. So before the next item on the agenda is the comp plan committee, but before turning it over to Commissioner Holst for an update on the comp plan committee, I just wanted to discuss a concern that has been raised to myself and to various other commissioners on a matter that's handled by the comp plan committee. As commissioners may recall, we set a public hearing for the phase 1 of the 1 to 4 unit infill study at our next meeting. As Director Paredes indicated, community outreach and engagement has already started by the city on the items that we had approved for a public hearing, I believe a few sessions ago. So it's my understanding that various commissioners have been contacted by various, or at least 2 community members regarding the parameters of the phase 1 portion of this study, specifically with regards to the ownership occupancy requirement for the alternative dwelling units, or otherwise known as ADUs, before being moved from phase 1 of the study to phase 2, which is to phase 2, I believe, is hopefully to follow sometime next year. And so from my understanding, the central concern that has been voiced is that either the commission or staff is doing something procedurally incorrect by moving that portion of the study from phase 1 to phase 2. And just for context, and just to reiterate that phase 1 and phase 2 are the same study, but that staff divided it into 2 parts, in part to avoid some of the difficulties that we recently had with the recent parking study and the size and sort of the length of managing it at the committee and commission level. So mainly it was to produce various proposals by staff that are easier to discuss and debate during committee and during our commission meetings for those who were part of the zoning study at the comp plan committee. It was very tedious and unnecessarily difficult, I think, just by the amount of content that was included in that study. So I've had the opportunity to discuss these concerns with staff yesterday afternoon and with the city attorney's office, and they've informed me that they believe we're doing everything properly procedurally, and that we may proceed with the public hearing next week with its scope as previously outlined. The ownership occupancy portion of the study is currently being set to be completed during the phase 2. And to my understanding, that's because staff needs more time to fully study the issue. With that said, I don't, everybody here has their own perspective. That's the entire purpose of this particular group. And so I would never try to speak for the commission as a unit without being expressly authorized by the body to do so. So I would just wanted to take a few minutes or time to open the floor to anyone who wants to voice any concerns about this or any opinions about this. I suppose the staff's decision to move it to phase 2. Is there any thoughts on that or any comments? Commissioner Tadeo?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding of this study is that our options were to either essentially do everything together and have these much needed changes come to City Council in perhaps 2 years, or to accelerate parts of these by splitting it into phases. It seems to me, if anything, that we're doing things faster and trying to get some things into the code faster than we otherwise would. Is that an accurate understanding?
Yeah, that was my understanding too. I mean, the parking study, going back to the parking study took years to complete, and when we received it, it was like a 80-page document that was crisscrossing through various sections of the codes, and it was just incredibly difficult to handle. And I think one of the comments that came out of that from the comp plan committee was whether it could be broken up. A study of that size could be broken up and handled, sort of swallowed in smaller pieces by the commission and committees. And so with this particular study that was released, it's all the same study. It's just the goal is to address issues that are non-contentious, perhaps don't require the amount of civil engagement, don't require the amount of background studying into it. Get those stuff done first, be efficient about it, and then move on to the larger items that maybe require more time. And so I believe you're correct. I think the way you phrased it is so it's a good summary of the way I understood it as well. And so I'll turn over to Commissioner Grill.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Grill. I just want to echo the chair's comments. I think a lot of folks had just started comp plan committee, and we presented them with the entirety of the parking study. And it was an overwhelming document for folks to review. It took a really long amount of time, and I don't think in some cases that individuals got to spend as much time thinking about specific topics as maybe they would like. So I'm very in favor of the phases. I think it's challenging in how you split it up, but I think the staff did, a good job of doing that. I think it's just challenging based on the size and scope of some of these items to try to take them all at once. So I'm very much in favor of this process.
Commissioner Hood. Commissioner Hood.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. I would like to echo everyone's comments about the incremental approach and dealing with these issues one by one. I think this is a good way to go forward, and I appreciate all the work that staff has done on this and the research. So if they're in favor of it, I'm going to be in favor of it. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hood. And just to clarify, the concern that was outlined, and that I want commissioners to be able to voice their opinion on, or perhaps have further discussion on, is the fact that the owner occupancy requirement was originally scheduled by staff to be in the phase 1 portion. When it came back to us in the comp plan committee, it was informed to us that it had been moved to phase 2. And the concern by community members was essentially whether that was appropriate. And again, I've been informed that it is. It's all the same study. It's just for the reasons that I've just discussed, sort of being broken down the way that it is. or to my understanding anyways. And so if there's, I see Director Pereira has any comments, but that's the particular question that I'm posing to the commission in the interest of transparency and allowing people to voice their opinion on that subject. I just wanted to make sure that people had an opportunity during the commission to, ask questions or, get further clarification, or if they disagree to voice that. But I see Director Pereira has a comment, so I'll turn to him. Director Pereira.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for your summary, and commissioners for that have already weighed in to ask questions and all of that. I agree with everything that's been said. I do have a slight correction that I want to make to something I think you suggested, Chair, if you might let me. One is that when we brought this to the commission in April, and then the commission initiated it, we had gone into the initial proposal was to include that provision in phase one. Because of the committee conversation, the Comp and Neighborhood Committee conversation, there was at least one commissioner, perhaps more. I think, Chair, you were at least that one that directed staff to move this piece into phase two. And so we didn't take action to do that because the study is one study and it doesn't get into the details of what's in phase one and phase two. But we took that as direction, and nobody seemed to object to it in the committee, and we move forward. And so that's the reason why it's in phase two. Just to be really clear, it was not staff independently acting. It was based on direction from the committee. And one of the main reasons, which I think is really, really legitimate for delaying it, is to gather more community input on it. And so that's, I think, where we're at. The other thing I wanted to really stress to the commissioners is this is one study. So the idea that phase one is sort of by itself and phase two is a completely different study, that's not true. This is only one study. We're already working deeply on phase two. We have a consultant who's helping us analyze various components that will inform ultimately what we end up developing as text amendments. So we're really trying to take a very thoughtful approach, and phase two will get into more community engagement opportunities. And so that's the reason why taking some additional time here is beneficial, both for the research but also the engagement side of it. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Director Pereira, and I agree with everything you said. I did have concerns about sort of the expediency of that particular policy change. I did voice it, and so I agree with what you're saying, and I can further elaborate, but I'll turn it over to other commissioners first before, or if I don't even know if it's necessary, but Commissioner Tagiev and then Commissioner Kantner.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Director Pereira, just based on something you said about the phasing of the study. Does that mean that, given that it's a single study, that all the text amendments would effectively be adopted at the end of the study, or that we would adopt amendments based on phase one, followed by amendments on phase two, even though it's a single study?
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner Tagiev, our intent is to move the phase one text amendments now, have a public hearing, get Planning Commission recommendation on it, and move them forward at the City Council. I think part of the benefit of the phased approach is that the idea is these were regulatory components that were less controversial, less problematic, less of a big policy change, and more sort of a no-brainer. Some may disagree, obviously, but this would be regulatory sort of relief that folks in the community, developers, homeowners could take advantage of within the year, that while we're continuing to look at these deeper policy changes, part of the broader study. So I don't think unless attorneys tell us where we can't do this, my thought was that this would move forward, the amendments would take place, and that more would be coming later. Hopefully that answers your question.
So I think
Yes, it
Commissioner
does.
Tagiev has a follow-up question. Commissioner Tagiev, do you have a follow-up question, or can I call another commissioner?
I just wanted to through the chair, I just wanted to thank Director Pereira. I fully agree and aver, and this seems like an entirely sensible way to tackle a study of this scope overall.
So I'll turn over to Commissioner Kantner and then Commissioner Yang.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for having this discussion. I was one of the commissioners who got an email about this from a former planning commissioner who's no longer on the board. And first of all, I wanted to check, maybe you already said it, but what's the timeline that we're looking at for phase 2?
I'll let Director Pereira provide a more concise answer on that. I remember that it was told that it would be handled in early 2022, but all of that is dependent on staff resources and projects, so things might change. So I'll let Director Pereira answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair and Commissioner Kantner for the question, and commissioners. The general timeline, and we're actually we've updated it a bit. The broader study in recent days here is we'd like to begin some initial engagement now. We're talking to district councils about starting some of that this fall and continuing into the spring. Our technical consultants should be hopefully completing all of their work by the end of the year. So we'll have, or shortly thereafter, we'll have all of their information. We may do some engagement around some of that in a summarized form next year, in the first part of next year. And then that will continue over the summer. We'd be intending to have, the draft text amendments put together. Not entirely sure how long that's going to take, because there are some pretty big changes and quite a bit of research and sort of policy option conversation to figure out, with the goal of getting to the commission by the fall. So around maybe this time next year. That's at least the working calendar. And we've updated our website with that general calendar, but more details will be fleshed out in the coming months. And most in particular, opportunities for community engagement and with individual kind of community groups.
Gotcha, thank you. If I could just follow up with a few other comments. I just wonder if there's maybe like a third option here. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ADU requirements were only passed maybe 5 years ago. And I think there was some study at that time about whether or not we should allow only owner-occupied units. And so hopefully staff can weigh in on this, but I don't know that there would need to be really that much more study on the issue. And in terms of the actual text amendment, that seems pretty easy to draft. And so I wonder if there's maybe an interim step where, we don't, obviously it hasn't been included in community engagement for phase 1 at this point, but maybe like not to add a third phase to the study, but just something that we could kind of move along. Because as other commissioners were saying, when we got the parking study, it was so dense. And when we get the phase 2 of this study, it's going to, again, be very dense. And so it will be hard to pull out that owner-occupied piece. So just wondering what staff's thoughts are about maybe moving this separately in between phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner Kantner, I think we can think about that. I do think it's more complicated than just sort of raising it as an item and recommending that it get removed. One could amend that requirement. One could put some limiting factors on a requirement. None of that study has happened. That there is the related issue of if say additional principal units are permitted in the broader set of districts, single family districts and duplex district, is there a similar provision? We're looking at all of those things together in phase 2. And so, I would expect somebody to raise that question with phase 2 as well. And so it gets a lot messier in my mind to try to move that forward on a phase 1A or, you know, before 2. Personally, I think a lot of these things are interrelated. And I hesitate to try to split this up too much. I think you know, we're doing. I think ultimately there's a lot of work that goes into this, and a lot more, I think, engagement on this study perhaps than others. It impacts. You know, it will impact 70% of the residentially zoned property in the city, unlike, say, like the RM study, which was only dealing with multifamily districts. So it is a similar kind of scope as to the parking study, but we're just trying to do our best to tackle the issues as it makes sense logically. So I guess I don't necessarily think that's a great idea, but we could keep thinking about it as we go.
Any follow-up questions?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for that feedback. It's really helpful.
All right, LT Commissioner Yang.
Yeah, I have a serious concern about that approach, since I think this is a whole big chunk document which will impact 70% of the residential area. And I agree, some areas may be easily identified and recommended to do, but the other may be more difficult. But as a whole, I think this whole project will give us a whole picture. If you ask us to think about isolatedly or separately, phase 1, we will get something done, we will approve it, then we will move to phase 2, then we will tackle whatever left in the phase 2. But my impression is some questions covered in phase 2 probably will have huge impact on the decision we have to make on phase 1. I agree, these factors may be interrelated, so I don't think if you have a good idea to tackle them separately and ask us for opinion separately.
So from my understanding, during comp plan, Mr. Wade sort of informed that the items that were sort of addressed in phase 1 have, outside of the principal structure change, and what that was to allow more than one principal structure in a property. The items in phase 1 are sort of can be handled independently, and the items in phase 2 can be handled independently as well, in terms of as a group, the way that they have grouped them together. Is that correct, Luis?
Chair, yeah, and commissioners, I think that's generally right. There is some interrelationships between phase 1 and phase 2. For instance, phase 1 does have several accessory dwelling unit provisions, recommendations that would make it easier to do ADUs, or at least expand the universe of opportunity for ADUs in terms of zoning, what's permitted. So, you know, we may, I anticipate we'd have some additional amendments around ADUs in phase 2. I would hope, it's not impossible, but I would hope that we would not sort of undo completely what we did in phase 1 with phase 2. But we do sort of reserve that right because we're looking at the broader set of regulations in phase 2. And so there may be pieces of that get, you know, reconsidered slightly, but we're trying to not do that. These phase 1 amendments are hopefully they'll stand on their own in terms of logic and to be able to continue them. And phase 2 will cast a bigger net in terms of policy changes.
So I'll turn to Commissioner Host.
Yeah, just quick question. Is there interim an option? For example, you know, we just passed a house moving it to a triplex. Is there a mechanism by which someone could make an ADU, not have to follow the owner occupancy requirement through some sort of request or appeal or something like that? Is there any process for that or not? So.
Chair, Commissioner Holst, that was a question I actually asked internally recently. I don't know that there is a process, but with most things, with regulations, there's some sort of relief valve, whether it's a variance or a request for reasonable accommodation, for instance, is something the city looks at. I don't know exactly the answer to that question. But and I see that zoning administrator Yaya Diata is here as well. I don't know if he has thoughts on it that he'd want to offer off the cuff, but presumably there is. I mean, that is the regulation, though. But you know, I don't know, like, honestly, what the answer is.
So I don't know if Mr. Diata wants to provide input, but if I don't see his hand, I won't put him on the spot. Is there any, well, with all that said, I appreciate everybody's thoughts on it. I think the central issue that we're running into is just like with the inclusionary zoning study, is there's a lot of work around the field of trying to work on these issues that are important to all of us, whether it's equity or housing or whatever it is. And they all have a priority, right? And staff can only work so fast and move things along so fast. And so I'm glad to hear that it is something that we're going to be discussing here in the near future. But otherwise, if there's no additional comments on this or anybody that would like to sort of maybe try to change it, we can move on to comp plan committee updates. So I'll give it a second here.
All right. Well, comp plan updates, pretty straightforward. Our meeting for September 29th was canceled. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 13th. And to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing on that agenda at this time.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Host. Next item on the agenda is Transportation Committee. I'll turn over to Commissioner Risberg.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Our next meeting is this coming Monday, October 4th at 4:30. We're going to hear two items. The first is on providing update, comments on the Minnesota Street reconstruction design, and Public Works will be providing a presentation on that. Second, we've been asked to move forward a recommendation on the Point Douglas Regional Trail Master Plan, and our Parks Department will be presenting on that. So that's, again, this coming Monday, 4:30 to 6. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Commissioner Risberg. Moving on to communications nominations is Commissioner Underwood. I'll turn it over to her. If she's not present today. So Louisa, is there any updates on, well, I do have an update on communications. Several commissioners offered to sit on communications and nominations. And one I was really glad to hear with the interest. I think the more people that we have, it's probably the lightest in terms of workload from the committees, but it's probably, I would think, one of the most important in deciding who is being recommended or given the thumbs up, I believe, to the recommendations to the mayor on potential candidates. So it's a very important role. So I appreciate the commissioners that reached out and volunteered to sit on it. Thank you so much. I know
that every additional committee that someone sits on, it's additional work. So it's very much appreciated. And so, Luis, I'll turn over to you for any updates on communications for nominations.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I echo your thanks to the commissioners that have stepped up. I believe we have 5 members now, which is a great number of committee members. And I will note also that still trying to get some feedback on the recruitment strategy for this fall. So those committee members will be hearing about that shortly, as well as we're getting into end of the year season. So beginning to think about annual report production. And so we'll be bringing you a sort of an outline or table of contents to that committee shortly. That's the end of the update.
Thanks. Moving on to task force liaison reports, I'll turn over to Commissioner DeJoy and then Commissioner DeJoy first and then Commissioner Grill.
Thank you, Chair. This is Commissioner DeJoy here. The Hillcrest Community Advisory Committee hasn't met since June 15th, but work planning continues to happen at a staff level with also our consultants. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 19th. And in the chat, I posted the link that you could look for updates in on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeJoy. Commissioner Grill?
The Riverview Station Area Planning Task Force met on September 14th. And I was not present, but the meeting generally covered a discussion of the Randolph station area, so Randolph and West 7th. And it looks like from the notes that it was a very productive meeting. The next meeting for the Riverview Station Area Task Force is October 12th at 6 p.m. And I believe that the main topic of discussion will be the Otto and West 7th station area.
Thank you for the update, Commissioner Grill. Any questions for either Commissioner DeJoy or Commissioner Grill? All right, seeing none, I'll move over to old business. Anything anybody would like to talk about? New business, anything anybody would like to add to the agenda at our next meeting? Otherwise, that will conclude the October 1st, 2021 St. Paul Planning Commission meeting. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks everybody for your thoughts on the issue that we were discussing today. And I wish everybody has a good weekend. And I'm hoping, Commissioner Grill, could you stay for a second? I need to run something by you here really quickly.
Yeah, totally.